My name is Alan Schmaltz, and I'm a researcher at ReExpress AI. Today, I'll be giving an overview of our paper, Similarity-Distance-Magnitude Activations. In 8 minutes, we're going to focus on the high-level motivation and conceptual intuition for our approach for a robust and interpretable uncertainty quantification for language models, and how it fits into the broader AI interpretability and explainability landscape. Today we'll be focused on the standard multi-class classification setting with language models. We're given some input X, which will be a prompt in the task content, such as a movie review or declarative statement, and we want to classify that into one of C discrete labels. For example, positive or negative movie reviews, or whether or not the statement is correct. We'll be given a labeled training set and a calibration set for learning. And in the present work, we'll be in the setting where we have access to the language model's parameters, but we're going to hold those fixed and train a final layer adapter. For reference, we also compare to the language models without adapters. We'll seek to predict the class y hat, as well as an estimate of the predictive uncertainty. And specifically, we'll seek the following notion of calibration, which is a quantity generally useful for selective prediction and conditional branching decisions. We want to estimate whether a new unseen test point is in a region of the distribution for which the class and conditional accuracy is at least alpha, in our case 0.95. When deploying language models, we require high accuracy for our task, but a single point prediction is not sufficient. We also require an estimate of the predictive uncertainty of those classification decisions. This is necessary for constructing reliable search graphs, whether for human adjudication or test time conditional branching of the models themselves. But the estimator of the predictive uncertainty cannot itself be a black box if we're going to trust it for high stakes decision making. We don't want to add a cascade of additional black boxes over the black box language model. This is very challenging since the parameters of typical neural networks are generally non-identifiable. Additionally, the output logits of neural networks are in effect a highly lossy compression of the epistemic or reducible uncertainty. In other words, the very type of uncertainty that you would hope to have a strong handle over is obscured by the typical output softmax activation. And finally, calibration is an unusual property in that it is largely independent of model scale. Just increasing the model size is not sufficient for improving calibration, and it's not just a theoretical concern. The stakes are high given that language models are already being used for real-world decision making. At a high level, our solution is going to be to shift the locus of interpretability from the parameters to interpretability of the estimator of the predictive uncertainty. To achieve this, we introduce a new activation function that will serve as a memory layer over neural networks, and from this we can construct a robust estimator of the predictive uncertainty. It will also provide interpretability by exemplar against instances with known labels. The estimator will also inherit the updatability properties of instance-based metric learners, so we'll gain an additional means of adapting conditional branching decisions beyond in-context learning, retrieval, and tool calling. To further contextualize this, I want to briefly review some of the key tools for interpretable and explainable AI for classification. And here, I'm going to treat the terms interpretability and explainability as synonymous. An approach from 10 years ago is to treat classification as sequence prediction, where we generate token-level explanations of the document-level classification. We can then guide generation, and by extension, the final classification decision, by modifying the weights of the explanation control tokens. But the absence of robust calibration makes each of those branching decisions brittle to distribution shifts, which we address with the new method today. It's also not clear how the training instances relate to new, unseen test examples, which we turn to next. To address some of those limitations, a paper from 5 years ago introduced modeling neural networks as decomposable, hidden instance-based metric learners. This paper introduced a mechanistic decomposition of a final layer CNN adapter to back out a hard attention mechanism useful for feature detection. That CNN adapter can be viewed as a memory layer from which we can then construct our KNN approximation of the network. This then provides instance-wise data valuation, and that KNN is a close approximation of the original model. And in fact, the approximation errors follow an actionable pattern. They tend to be from regions of the distribution that are difficult for the original model to predict. We'll use this idea to derive signals of the epistemic uncertainty and construct a robust and interpretable estimator. And surprisingly, we'll get to a much simpler overall method that's easy to add to existing networks and for which we can reliably estimate our target calibration quantity of class and prediction conditional accuracy at least a given alpha. Our new activation function will be a lightweight structure. Similar to the 2021 work, the memory layer will consist of a 1D CNN adapter, but for the experiments here, we'll simplify to a mean pooling over the hidden states concatenated with that of the final token position. For long sequences and/or feature detection, we could in principle combine this with a learned max pool over positions, but this simplification enables caching of the hidden states in reasonable space. This adapter will then produce an exemplar vector H' that we'll use for dense matching. And from that, we'll derive signals of the epistemic uncertainty that will serve as instance-wise regularization terms, and a change of base in place of the standard softmax. Magnitude will be the standard output logits of the model. We normalize the L2 distance to the first match in training via the class-wise empirical CDFs, where the min controls for class-wise skew in the distribution of outliers. D is a quantile, so a higher D corresponds to a closer L2 distance. Finally, the similarity accounts for depth-wise nearest matches in training that are correctly predicted and match the prediction of the test instance. A loss analogous to the standard cross-entropy loss then follows with a corresponding instance-wise change of base. In this way, for example, as the similarity increases, the penalty for wrong predictions against the labeled ground truth is reduced in relative terms, other things being equal. In order to calibrate selective classification quantities of interest given these signals of the epistemic uncertainty, we partition the output distribution via thresholds on the similarity, distance, and magnitude via a held-out set to determine the well-calibrated, high-probability region. First, we rescale Q to take into account D and the output logits given the predicted class. We refer to this as a rescaled similarity, and it'll be the basis for partitioning the distribution. Next, we progressively restrict the set of calibration points by a minimum rescaled similarity until the output thresholds constructed from the CDFs over the SCM output are at least alpha for all classes. We refer to the resulting region as a high reliability region. Unlike split conformal estimators, for example, the resulting quantity is suitable for selective classification. Since this partitioning occurs after the parameters of the memory layer have been fixed, it also serves as a check on the optimization process itself. In the present work, we estimate a region from a single alpha, but in principle, one could also construct multiple regions if additional resolution is needed. Here, we consider two representative binary classification tasks, sentiment classification and factuality classification, where the underlying language model is Phi 3.5. We compare to representative classes of estimators over in-distribution, covariate shifted, and out-of-distribution test sets. An important property of the SCM estimator is that it remains informative over in-distribution data, despite otherwise seeking a relatively stringent calibration criteria. The robustness advantage becomes clear over covariate shifted and out-of-distribution data, over which existing estimators are very poorly calibrated in high probability regions. In summary, this work introduces SCM activation functions and SCM estimators, which are robust and interpretable estimators of the predictive uncertainty. In this way, SCM activations provide a principled, data-driven substrate for approaching selective classification, calibration, and out-of-distribution detection with language models.